Welcome again for another edition of Fireside Chat, and this time we are going to talk about deepfakes. So this is Sujit Christy, President ISC2 Colombo chapter, going to have this conversation with Thanuki Goonesinghe, who I consider is a legal professional, and her enthusiasm for technology is amazing. So the subject deepfake has found headlines in the recent past, and the emergence of new generation of digitally manipulated media has given rise to considerable worries about possible misuse. Advancement in artificial intelligence have enabled the production of highly realistic fake videos that depict a person saying or doing something they have never said or done. The popular and catch-all then term that is often used for these fabrications is deepfake, a blend of the words deep, learning, and fake. The underlying technology is also used to forge audio, images, text, raising similar concerns. So deepfakes are defined as manipulated or synthetic audio or visual media that seem authentic and which feature people to appear to say or do something they have never said or done, produced using artificial intelligence techniques, including machine learning and deep learning. It can be best understood as a subset of a broader category of AI-generated synthetic media. So our conversation is going to revolve more around the deepfakes, because in the last fireside chat, we spoke about the complexities in the AI world. Thanuki, thank you so much for making time again to be in this fireside chat. I just would like to ask you, what are the different categories of risks associated with deepfakes? Because today, the digital media is so popular. You find content in almost all popular platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Insta, TikTok, you name it, right? And everybody is on it, and sometimes it becomes very, very difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. So I'd like to hear from you. What are the different types of categories of risk which exist? Thanuki?
Hi, Sujit. Thank you very much for having me again. So jumping right into it, if we take the different types of risk categories that we experience with deepfakes, you can say that they range from being psychological risks to societal risks, and also financial risks as well, which is also part of society. But I think that it plays a significant role. That's why we need to talk about it a little bit away from the other categories. So if we talk about psychological and societal risks, these two I will take together because they're very, very connected to each other. So if you take a deep fake, like you said in the introduction, you're manipulating reality. You're manipulating something that is not actually true. It's not in existence. So that essentially brings about a lot of harm. Harm how? Because it can easily be used to damage someone's reputation. And that can have a lot of psychological harm for somebody. For example, if I am somebody who, so let's say naturally, I'm not someone who consumes alcohol, but let's say somebody makes a deep fake of me, drunk out of my mind, falling all over the place. And this gets shared everywhere. Imagine the position that this puts me in. of course, I being a very vocal person, I will not be afraid to stand up and say, that's not me. And since I come from a background of law, I will know what steps to take. But this is not the case for a majority of people out there. A majority of people out there don't know how to deal with something of this nature. In fact, they don't even know how to identify if this is true or false. Some people might wonder how this even came to be. So the psychological harm associated with that has a lot to do with people feeling anxious all the time in their interactions with people, which can be very negative in terms of how you network and how you get about in society. And it can also lead to depression. I mean, the after effects of an episode like that on your life. So this is quite common. This is something that has been happening for a very long time in terms of cyberbullying and harassment. And I think that deepfakes will help elevate that further and increase the impact that it has on its victims. Then also when it comes to deepfakes, we see a lot of use of deepfakes to in terms of pornography and child pornography. So this is a very common thing that is being used for. And I just think of how crazy this is in terms of something like revenge porn and how it could completely alter the standard reality of what that means for somebody. Because here, the perpetrators are empowered by technology to create something, to take revenge out of someone based on content that does not even exist. And this can be used to extort money from people. So sextortion can take a whole new meaning under the paradigm of deepfakes. So we have these as very specific examples of how it has impacted society. We saw two examples that we keep citing a lot nowadays, Taylor Swift and Rashmika Mandana. These are two examples from two parts of the world, both of which dealt with two celebrities whose likeliness was manipulated to show something that wasn't real about them. But even them, it took a while for actions to be taken to take this content offline. So there's a lot to think about how it would be for everyday individuals if it took a while for celebrities of that scale. There's also this aspect of trust in society. Trust becomes significantly undermined under the paradigm of deepfakes. Why I say this is because we know that usually there are issues of catfishing online, where people, even on online dating websites, gaming platforms, on metaverse platforms, people pose as somebody they are not, to most of the time for dating, or even when it comes to children. This is something that is done a lot by pedophiles that want to get content, for their gratification. So I'm just thinking how much of this is going to be elevated further with the use of deepfakes. So that's a bit more on how society is impacted. Again, if you look at gender inequity as a problem, and also I'm going to touch a bit on children and the future of children in light of deepfakes. So if you talk about gender equity, Deep Trace, which is a cybersecurity firm based in Amsterdam, has said that deepfake pornographic videos are mainly aimed and targeted majorly at women than men. Increasing gender inequality. So yes, I understand that, but at the same time, I would like to think that this could also have a drastic impact on other vulnerable groups like LGBTQIA plus people. And there's a lot of people identifying as such around the world now, and we can only think of the impacts this has on people like that as well. And about children, why I want to add children to this mix especially is because ruining a child's reputation at an impressionable age especially at a time where everything they do is such a big deal for them, especially when you're a kid, everything you do matters. One of the significant problems I see with this is that it could have potential loss of education and future job opportunities, because a lot of people see this as a black mark. Somewhere down the line, it's going to be pulled up and they're going to ask them, what is this? And children, especially from our part of the world, our cultures are such that we don't talk about these things. We're afraid to even speak about it with our parents. So as it is, this propagates what I would say, it helps to propagate the cancel culture. The cancel culture where a child who falls victim to it could be devastated for life, cancelled in the form of not being able to move forward in their lives, having this follow them like a plague throughout their lives. So this is something we need to think about, and we definitely need to think about how to make the cyberspace safer for children and youth in that sense. And then moving on to, if you look at organizations and financial companies, risks associated with those areas. So if you talk about organizations, it's commonplace to have a lot of phishing schemes where people get something in a link, and even adults fall prey to this. They would click on it and then they lose all access to their information. So I would think that it's easier to trick anybody into accepting anything, because now a deep fake could be used to create an account in the most realistic way possible, that no one will be able to tell between the difference between myself and my deep fake profile. And that makes something like that very easy. I mean, if you think of that in a workplace setting, that you can imagine the consequences of that within a workplace. In terms of organizations, another thing that we have to worry about is the difficulty that an organization is going to be in terms of finding evidence and detection. So these are two things that go hand in hand. One is that organizations and even countries still do not have access to the sophisticated tech that is needed to detect the better versions of deepfakes. I'm not talking about cheap fakes. I'm talking about deepfakes that are done with the best of technology. Recently, OpenAI launched Sora. It's a text-to-image platform, and if anyone has seen the videos that have been developed on this platform, you will understand that it is unbelievably hyper-realistic. And it just terrified me to no end to think how much even a platform like this could be used to create something that doesn't exist and put people in trouble, put companies in trouble, even manipulate voters facing an election. All of that is possible because clearly technology is moving at a breakneck speed and we are just lagging behind. In terms of financial harm, I don't know if it's all right if I go into financial harm also.
Yes,
Yeah,
sure,
okay.
please.
Talk about financial harms, and the reason why I want to talk about that also as a separate heading is because we're starting to see more and more of that in terms of conversations nowadays. Like, for example, very recently, we had this Hong Kong company, a multinational company, where a finance worker was defrauded of 25 million US dollars in what should be called an elaborate scam, where he was they were tricked into participating in a video call with several individuals who looked and sounded like his colleagues. So he couldn't differentiate between what was real and what was not. And this is maybe people may think, oh, this is like a one-of-a-kind phenomenon. It is not, because it has been happening for a few years, but the conversation is picking up more now. That's why we're talking about this. But a similar incident happened even in 2019, where CEO of an energy company in UK was also basically he also was scammed into getting out about 243,000 US dollars. And that was on using a phone scam. So phone scams, yes, they make sense, because if we talk about deepfakes, again, don't be mistaken, they're not just referring to images and video. We're also talking about audio. We're talking even about texts that are made in to match the likeliness of a certain person, which make it extremely difficult to differentiate between the real person and the faked model of it. So that's something to keep in mind. And there was also an incident of a AI voice cloning, which was used in a heist, which is now being investigated by Dubai investigators. And there too, it was also where a branch manager of a Japanese company in Hong Kong received a call from a man whose voice he recognized, the director of his parent business. So you can see a lot of the scams that involve deepfakes have a lot to do with impersonations, people you associate on a day-to-day basis. And it really, really questions this aspect of how do we trust in an environment like this? How do we trust in this present context? And then it makes us think, okay, lots of people are talking about the zero trust approach, and maybe that could be the way forward. So those are things to think about, in my opinion.
Okay, very well articulated, but I just want to make our viewers aware. All what you probably heard in the last 15 minutes, don't form an opinion that it is bad, that technology is bad. That's not our intent. This AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, whatever you call, has a lot of benefits in all sphere of life, science, and various other spaces. But the bad actors use this technology to cause harm. And there are creators, there are creator technologies, there are disruptor technologies. Now, that's what people do in deep fakes. Now, there's a lot of material, like my voice clip is already out there. Thanuki, your voice clip is already out there. Your pictures are out there as well. My pictures are out there. So a bad person with a bad intention, he can use these information and train this model over a period of time, and then superimpose on something and make it appear like what happened to Taylor Swift, or what happened to Rashmika Mandanna, right? The images, their images were, the real images were superimposed on somebody else's image. And a lot of people believed it to be true. Right? And you also spoke about our culture, right? I mean, traditionally, anything bad happening to us, it's usually kept hush hush, right? We are not supposed to speak about it because it brings the family reputation into stakes, or you probably will have a stigma planted on you or your family, right? The same is true with the organizations. Now, right now, if you Google, you probably find only very few cases reported of such scams where the technology has been used. So some of the companies, even if they've fallen victims, they may not be reporting it because they're scared that it might have an impact on their brand reputation, impact on their share pricing, and various other cascading effects, right? A ripple effect kind of, right? So most of them are probably grappling with this challenge. But as you rightly said, it is something which we need to face head on, even though it is, evolving at a breakneck speed. We also need to figure out how to do it. Now, I think one of the key points which you articulated is that while cheap fakes and deep fakes are growing phenomenally, the organizations may not have the capability or the technology or the resources to detect them on a timely basis. right? Leave alone the organizations. Let's also appreciate and acknowledge that even the police department or even the governments may not have the resources to have this technology deployed so they can use it to help people overcome such challenges. And I think globally, several countries are investing a lot in terms of setting up labs, training people, acquiring technologies to detect such issues. So the other point I just wanted to quickly highlight is that this can also disrupt countries, right? And it can also propagate an analogy or a narrative which may not be the truth, right? How quickly can people get a different narrative out there is how the world is moving right now. While the truth could be something else, but what can be presented in a mainstream media or in any other form is also a cause for concern. You briefly touched about how it can impact elections and the political space, right? So with that being there, I just want to shift this conversation to a different dimension, right? Today, we are talking about different countries. We saw what Europe did with GDPR, and they've also gone through several revisions, and several other countries have also adopted their own data protection laws. Sri Lanka was the first to do that in the subcontinent. India has followed. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and various other countries, the bills are ready, so they just need to enact, right? At least when you're looking at it from a region perspective. But if you go into Asia Pacific, and I think those countries, like for example, Singapore has its own data protection laws. Now, one of the things which they talk about is that if data, I'm talking about personally identifiable information, or any data pertaining to a subject, if it has been breached or exfiltrated using a deepfake. Now, let me give you a scenario. Let's say if I'm a director or a senior officer in an organization, and if my image and my voice is being deepfaked, and I convince one of those executives in the organization who has access to this data, and I tell them, guys, we have engaged a new consultant who would want to review the data and provide us a report. Can you just download the top 100 premium customers of us and send the data to them in an Excel file? Right? This is a brief scenario, right? A use case maybe, and I probably there may not be any such cases already in the courts where it's being debated or justice being sought. But I just want to preempt a scenario. How would the Data Protection Act of us come into play if such a scenario happens? Thanuki?
So the Data Protection Act, in terms of looking at a few provisions of the Data Protection Act, my understanding of it is that it allows companies a certain amount of space to deal with issues like this in a way that is unique to them. But that being said, it is not I will put it, it's not a way out of it. So what I mean by this is there are things in this act which are called mitigatory circumstances that are considered by the regulator when looking at a situation of a breach. So when there is a breach, the regulator will have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, basically, and look at what has this company done to ensure that something like this will not happen, firstly. How robust is this program? How dynamic is this program? Is what they will be looking at. There is a thing called the Data Protection Management Program that is recommended for companies under Section 12. not just recommended, I think it's mandated. It's right to say it's mandated. And it's mandated only because, I mean, there has to be a system by which an act of this nature comes into operation with companies. You can't just dump it on them and expect them to overturn all their processes overnight. So this is a process. We have been given this timeline all the way until 18th of March next year to put these things in place, these processes in place. And this particular data protection management program, together with other factors that they consider, like the gravity of what has happened, what steps have we taken to mitigate it, how quickly have we notified the authority, so much of each case will be considered individually, and then only it will be they will consider whether to fine or not. But why I'm saying this is because what we need to understand is that this is not a way out for a company. It's not an excuse that they can hide behind, but it's a push in the right direction, that these are the steps that you need to take. Here are the guidelines, and also the Act provides for the Data Protection Authority to issue guidelines from time to time. So there's a lot of guidance that is supposed to come our way, especially for companies going forward. And all that together will help these companies to take the right steps. So it's a matter of doing your part. And what is expected is to make sure that these programs and these steps are forming part of a living process of that organization. It needs to come from within the organization. This whole consideration of privacy by design has to be there. So privacy, cyber safety, all of that by design, it needs to be there. And another factor I will just raise here is that this act recognizes certain principles of data protection, one of them being integrity, safeguarding confidentiality and integrity. So integrity means it essentially looks at your security measures, your cybersecurity infrastructure, right? And that, even though the act doesn't specifically mention deepfakes there, I would think that a creative interpretation of that section would mean that companies are encouraged to think about how do you ensure integrity of these systems within the paradigm of something like deepfakes and generative AI being used to infiltrate companies. Like, for example, if you're ensuring, if you're looking at a method of authenticating information, then companies need to now think, okay, if we have a face recognition set up to gain access to a whole heap of important information, how do we cater to a situation where some criminal out there is using a hyper-realistic deepfake to gain access into this system through a face recognition software, which is not as sophisticated as the tech that has been used by the criminal to create the deepfake? So I think that section, creatively and broadly interpreted, does capture this aspect of deepfakes. And in the same way, I would think even the Computer Crimes Act, which talks about gaining unauthorized access to computer systems and modifying, altering data, etc., those provisions also, I would think, I mean, if I'm to interpret it that way, I would interpret it creatively in that sense, to incorporate something like deepfake. So I don't think that Sri Lanka essentially lacks or is lagging behind. It's just that at the time when these laws came into play, some of these tech weren't even thought of. So I mean, it's practical to think, okay, we will be a few steps behind. But what matters at this point is to find ways to creatively interpret and also bridge these gaps that we are seeing with the laws. And I think that is the best response to that question that you asked.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to, add some more points to what you just said. Right. Well, the law is very clear, right? It clearly talks about different things to be done by an organization. One of the things they are also talking about the business impact analysis, right? So one should actually implement a process to assess the type of data they have and what would be the impact if that data is breached, right? So in order to do that, they definitely have to have a data protection management program or data management program or data management and protection program, whatever you may call it. You need to have a systematic process from the time you acquire the data, the use of data, where you store, and then you look at consent management and then the rest of it, right? Are you going to remove it after a certain time? Are you going to anonymize it? All that has to be thought through. So that whole process has to be lived every single day, right? The other thing which I also want to tell our viewers, if you're hearing this for the first time, it's never too late. If you heard it before and you've not started the journey, it's never too late. Start today, right? Because you need to get this process going, because you can't do this one day before the act comes into force, right? Because this was enacted 1.5 years ago. And 18 months just went like this, and another 18 months will just fly away, right? So we have very little time to put in processes, train people, have the structures in place to address all these things. So while we await updates from the regulatory authority in terms of the rules and regulations, there are a lot of other things we can still work on, which are not dependent on their output, right? Appointing of data protection officers, identifying your data, where is it staying or where is it being used? Who are your controllers? Who are your processes? All these can be done. It's within your control. Protection, right? I mean, Thanuki, you highlighted two important points: privacy by design, security by design. These are two words I think people have been using it repeatedly, and I think every organization has to internalize this. Right? So we need to ensure that we give priority to these two concepts. And you also mentioned the word zero trust, right? It's the thing everybody is talking about, the model, right? So on three principles, right? It's built on three principles. Continuously authenticate, right? So we may use different mechanism to authenticate the identity of the person who is trying to access the data. It could be a human, it could be a non-human. But is that process robust? The second element is the least privilege. What is the minimum access you need to grant? So it's kind of a damage containment program, where if somebody's access is breached, what extent can the bad guys have access to? And the last one, which a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about zero trust, is assumed breach, right? Everybody thinks we have never been breached. But what I believe, what the attackers are doing out there today, harvest now, decrypt later, and monetize it even later. Right. So right now, what everybody probably are doing is gather as much as data, and if it is encrypted or if it is protected, break the protection in the next phase, and the following phase will be to monetize. And then we are talking about a double-edged situation, double-barrel situation. The attackers may reach out to you, as Thanuki said, they may blackmail you. They may ask for ransom. And you might say at that point in time, I'm not going to pay a cent, bugger off. Pardon my language, right? That may be the attitude you would take. And at that point in time, the attacker is going to turn to the regulator and say, here are the data belonging to this organization. It's been breached. Now, it's like you caught between the deep blue and the deep blue sea and the devil, right? So any which ways, you're going to be penalized. But do we have to have this conversation then? Is a call you as an organization, as a leader, need to decide today. So thank you. Just moving on to the last segment of our conversation. What do you think as a nation, as a civil society, or as professionals, we should be doing to address not just the deepfakes, but the threats out there?
So that's a very interesting question. It's a very broad question because there's a lot that I think we can talk about doing, but I guess making that actually work is the bigger challenge. But at the same time, I think one of the first things that on a very basic level that we need to start at would be doing what you're doing here and what a few other people are doing out there is just creating general awareness. Because the first problem that we have in our society, even globally, is that most people don't know enough. They're not aware of what's happening. They don't even know the specifics of how a certain technology works and why it can be detrimental. Like you said at the beginning, yes, deepfakes come with a lot of advantages as well. It can be used to enhance education as much as it can be used in the other way to stop someone from pursuing a life where they can educate themselves by damaging their reputation. But at the same time, the good side of it does exist. It helps even in healthcare to simulate environments and make sure you get, you're able to practice for major surgeries, and so that you don't make any mistakes. There's so many uses of deepfakes. That's why we can't get rid of this technology. So I think first, we need to start by creating awareness of the existence of technologies like this. And that awareness can be useful not just for everyday users, but even those in government, because I don't think everybody who's seated in government has an idea of tech. People specialize in different areas. Some are good at agriculture related problems. Some are good at transportation related problems. Not everybody is an expert in tech. So that awareness needs to be spread across the board from users all the way up to government. So that's the starting point. And the next thing that I think is very important is that we look at existing laws with the intention of identifying what the gaps are. And this is important because I think a lot of countries have this habit of identifying a certain problem and then creating a law for that. Sometimes the issue with doing that is that there is not much connection or connectivity, synergy between laws that are there in the country. So for example, in Sri Lanka, we have about 7 technology specific laws. It would be really good if there could be synergies between these laws that helps us to implement them easily. That is something that is lacking, not just here, just everywhere. So I think one of the things that we must do is sit down to identify what are the gaps in these laws and see how we can address them by means of amendments. Or like how the newer laws, like the PDPA allows for certain guidelines to be issued from time to time. Having a provision like that is very useful in laws in general, because that can help us address issues as and when they arise in the future. And maybe that's a trend that any new law that comes up, whether it is in tech or anything else, needs to take account of. And something that we discussed very informally, which I think is very important, is this idea of having a certain body that is dedicated to handling the cyberspace, the concerns of the cyberspace. And that is important because just like how you can't, I mean, it's very difficult to address issues of cyberbullying and harassment from a ministry that is dedicated to women and children, or a state agency that is dedicated to women and children, because there are so many other problems that are already plaguing that particular ministry or agency. So it would be good to have a separate body that deals with cybersecurity, online harm, online safety, any of those things, because that would be something that specializes in this, and it would consist of experts in related areas, not limited to lawyers, but it can be anybody who has some hand in tech. And it will naturally, there'll be a marketplace of ideas that are created there that can help to address the evolving issues of technology. And lastly, I think that this is something also that we were thinking about, which I can vouch for, because seeing how it is in our courts, and most lawyers will agree, there's a severe backlog of cases in Sri Lankan courts. I think it would be the case in most courts, even in our region. I don't speak for the West, but mainly here, there is a severe backlog, which makes dealing with harms of this nature in an expedient fashion, the way it should be, very difficult. So I think there are many countries. I know in China, you have an internet court, you have cyber courts in different countries. Even in the States, you have different courts dedicated to work in this area, which really helps to streamline the internet, online safety, and tech-related issues through courts like this, and it will provide faster redress to the victims of these harms, which, after all, that is the requirement of the justice system, is to provide justice as soon as possible. It's not to be dragging a problem out for 10 to 15 years. By then, most of the damage would already be done. So I think that steps like these, where we create awareness across the board, supplement that with creative interpretation of laws, filling in the gaps of existing laws, while also having provisions to provide for guidelines in view of future-proofing the law, and also having a dedicated government agency to look into these matters, and the possibility of having a court or courts that are dedicated to cyberspace and related matters could be the way forward for any nation, and especially for Sri Lanka.
Absolutely, Thanuki. I mean, I like all what you said, right? I think this deserves special focus, right? And maybe there should be a committee or a group of professionals coming from diverse professions contributing to what should be enacted, right? And I think unlike other laws, the cyberspace is evolving so rapidly. Now, one of the things which came to my mind while you were talking about what we should be doing, it also requires to adjust the process to verify evidence, right? If you look at evidence in a physical case, let's say be it theft or murder, you're looking at an artifact. In the digital virtual space, proving beyond reasonable doubt becomes a big challenge for the judge, right? He needs to depend on an expert witness. And sometimes what you see and what you hear can also be deceiving with the fakes, right? So we are at a juncture where we have a lot more challenges. And I believe that when we all work together, we can overcome the challenges, right? On a lighter note, I just want to share this with the viewers as well. There was this bot created by a Russian man, and he was dating with 5,000 odd women, right? And the bot went ahead and made an appointment to go on a date with one specific woman at a specific museum or an art gallery. So the lady arrives there and the man has stood up. Now, here's what it is, right? She goes in there. She says, "I'm in. Are you coming?" And the bot says, "For sure, I'm coming." But what happened here is the bot forgot to tell the man that there's an appointment for him to go on a date. Right? The point what I'm trying to say is, while it can be on a lighter note, is that we need to transform, we need to evolve with time. Right? Well, the need of the hour is that we put in a framework, a governance structure to manage this tech. And I think the various other governments, like for example, EU, for instance, and I think the American government, they've also worked with NIST and I think OECD guidelines, right? I mean, you spoke about those. They clearly said how this tech should be used. And if this tech is being abused, they have a responsibility to report. Right? That's going to be a huge challenge, and it's not going to happen overnight. Right? There's a lot of things have to be put in place. So I would only urge all professionals out there to wear the thinking hat and come up with the best possible process, not to control and kill it, but to enable so that the mankind, the humanity can experience, get the best of this tech. Right? There are a lot of good users, but what we need to ensure is this tech is not used to, put people into uncomfortable zone or bring them into disrepute or tarnish their image. Right? In closing, Thanuki, any wisdom or thoughts of wisdom you want to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I just think that it is not difficult for a company to sit back and revisit their process, see how you're doing. It's like how you sit down with a journal in the morning and evaluate yesterday and look at how you're going to face today. It's very similar to that. It's just you need to think a little broader, and it requires a lot of creative thinking as well. So I think all that companies need to do is just sit back, revisit. If you're not doing enough, revamp it. But what's most important is to keep repeating it, because as you repeat and reiterate, you will find that you will lag behind a little bit, and this will help you stay the course. So that is what I believe should be the way forward for companies.
Thanuki, thank you so much for making time. So in closing, I would like to also add that deepfakes can take the form of convincing misinformation. It can also provide misleading information created or distributed with intention to cause harm. Let's acknowledge that. That's real. So with that thought, once again, Thanuki, thank you for making time. It's been wonderful talking to you. I have a lot of points which I've made I'm going to take with me and probably share it with my peers and my friends. I'm sure the viewers who are going to see this will also benefit out of it. So I'm going to look out for you. When you have an interesting topic, give me a shout and let's come back together and have another chat. Right? So thank you so much again. And Thanuki, wish you all the best and keep doing all what you do. Thank you.